I've long admired the work of Rasha Salti, curator, researcher, and since 2017 commissioning editor at La Lucarne, the experimental documentary program at ARTE. Rasha has curated numerous film programs, exhibitions, and cultural events for festivals, museums, and cultural institutions worldwide, with a focus on Palestinian and Arab art and cultural production. Similar to Merv, her cultural work and writing is research-based. For instance, her co-curated exhibitions, Saving Bruce Lee, African and Arab Cinema in the Era of Soviet Cultural Diplomacy, which was at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt here in Berlin in 2015, and also at the Garage Museum in Moscow. And her extensive exhibition, which became a book project, Past Disquiet, Narratives and Ghosts from the Exhibition of International Art for Palestine, Beirut, 1978. She likes long titles, as she explained. And that's why I took a little bit more time to say a little bit about her, because she's very humble and succinct in her bio. And this exhibition, Past Disquiet, was a long research project which showed, I think, which maybe had its first presentation almost 10 years ago, and has also shown at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, at museums in Barcelona, Santiago, Chile, Beirut, and is currently on display at a museum in Cape Town, South Africa. Very excited that you're here. Rasha Salti.
Thank you. Thank you for waking up on a Sunday. It seems completely ungodly. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to sound like Arte apparatchik. The problem is that I kind of like what I do, so I have a tendency to talk about it. I don't defend the whole entity, but I really love the program slot that I've been mandated to oversee. So, yeah, and I hope you will grill me and wake me up to what I don't see with La Lucarne and Arte. The point is that La Lucarne is a small window in French. It means it's a small window in the roof of an attic that brings light generally into a dark space. In English, it translates to skylight, and in German to Oberlicht. It is the program slot in the grid of Arte dedicated to experimental documentary and is broadcast on Monday nights around midnight. I say around midnight, it's really like 1 a.m., but it sounds, but when you're telling a filmmaker 1 a.m., they kind of, they get upset, and around midnight sounds jazzy. But I do find the metaphor, La Lucarne, to be a far more apt title than using the word avant-garde or vanguard, which draws implicitly a form of hierarchy that I'm not comfortable with. La Lucarne was in fact the 11th program slot to be introduced into the grid by a man called Thierry Garel. The Garel family is well known in cinema. And it was introduced in 1997. He was the director of the documentary unit at what was then called Arte/La Set, kind of an odd channel, marginal channel, but La Lucarne crystallized the ambition of that channel to create what they used to call an auteur television. La Lucarne is deemed marginal because of the hour of broadcast. Is late. Actually, it started when it was broadcast on Wednesdays, then it moved to Fridays, and now it's Mondays. But it's always around midnight. And the formal language audaciously transgressed the norms of documentary filmmaking and production, privileging form over narrative structure was never a dichotomy for Garel. I quote him, and he says that the art of documentary I don't like to quote men, especially not on a Sunday morning, but I have to quote him a couple of times. Please, forgive me. He says, the art of documentary is to produce in the mind of a viewer an image that does not necessarily exist on the screen. An ensemble of images, sounds, words, and presences organized to produce meaning. Documentary cinema is a thinking machine, not a seeing machine, as much for the person fabricating the film as for the person watching the film. Within 10 years, and in tandem with the political climate in France and in Europe, with the complete prevalence of market-driven economics and prevailing over political movements that were ruling France and Europe and dictating policies. Unfortunately, between the end of the 90s and, say, until kind of recently, documentary cinema became very formatted, very homogenized. And although television did a lot to promote documentary films, to make more documentary films available and to exist in different places like festivals and cinematheques, still there was a real pressure to format, to organize, to almost like paint by number, to create formulas that were paint by numbers. And 10 years after La Lucarne was instituted, so in 2007, Arte wanted to celebrate these 10 years. And so the space that La Lucarne afforded, the margin that it was, became further, given how much formatting had happened, actually. So the man that I replaced was the man who was the commissioning editor for La Lucarne at ARTE France from the beginning, was Luciano Rigolini. And so at the time, he and Garel, so in the 10-year celebration of La Lucarne, they were giving a lot of interviews and a lot of a press release. You know, there was events to celebrate the 10 years, and they both think back on why like Lucarne was created, given this like stark contrast in the canons. And they said that they were receiving projects and they were eliminating those that did not meet the standards. But they were also eliminating those that were too good or too sophisticated or too innovative. And that process of eliminating what was too good or innovative was becoming so painful that they decided to create this program slot. Interestingly, they also note that, so La Lucarne from its inception was intended as an international slot. So it was like an international window. And interestingly, they both say that the radical or experimental film proposals they were receiving from French filmmakers were so boring, so predictable, so over format, and they kind of repeated the same structure of what was perceived as experimental, that it was basically the international filmmakers or looking at cinema outside France that made La Lucarne vital. And I find that interesting. I'm not gonna, I mean, you know, I still work there and I need to go back to France. I'm not gonna stand here and say that it's still the case, but I have to say that I enjoy thoroughly the polyphony and the diversity that has been nurtured by this program slot, and I hope to continue to nurture it. Okay, so I took over in 2017. At that year, La Lucarne was celebrating its 20th anniversary. The catalog, looking back at the 20-year catalog, was super impressive. I can brag and mention a few names: Alan Berliner, Sergei Dvortsevoy, Naomi Kawase, Wang Bing, Chris Marker, Chantal Ackerman, but also Khadi Silla, Yervan Tianikian and Angela Ricci, Ben Rivers, Laurie Anderson. So yeah, like a really, really cool catalog. The question was, what do we do? A cocktail, we screening, and what good would that do? The first thing that I realized when I looked at that catalog was how much actually it was not. It included films that were taught in schools, so that were part of curricula. In other words, these marginal so-called films had integrated the canon and had become references for auteur cinema. The second thing I realized is that they were nowhere to be found. Like, okay, MoMA's, Cinematheque has a lot of them. Pacific Film Archive, maybe yes. Cinematheque of Paris, maybe Arsenal some. But the point is that they were not accessible. And that's when, in thinking about, the other thing is that who watches La Lucarne? Like if we, I get the horrific numbers every morning. So people who watch TV are people my age and older. It doesn't mean that the films are not seen, but the point is that it was horrific to find out that this incredible body of cinema was not being watched by younger people. And so with the director of the documentary unit, Fabrice Puchot, we decided to launch a YouTube channel. So maybe it's, to some, it's a desecration. Like, how do you, yes. But the YouTube channel proved to be so successful that now Arte is actually mostly seen via YouTube. And we have several YouTube channels. And I can say that the people who watch La Lucarne on YouTube are between the ages of 35 and 45, and mostly, and then it's 25 to 35. So the idea that the films that we're making, that we're helping come into existence, are watched by 25-year-olds is like, I can quit happy. Of course, I touched on something that I'd like to go back to, and it's that logic of audience measuring, and what happens to how we are evaluated by what we do, how filmmakers are evaluated. This obsession with measuring audience to determine the value of the work that we do, and it's to me, it's completely backwards. The tool itself is wrong. And of course, now people measure the clicks and the views and the whatever. But this logic is, to me, symptomatic of what is really wrong with the world today. Why fascism has gained so much currency in Germany, in France, and in other societies. There was a notion of what was public culture, public access, public park, public space. That notion was somehow protected from the logic of efficiency, market, success, consumer access, whatever. The more it has crept into how we evaluate film production, like the fact that film festivals are evaluated by their impact on generating euros, this notion of a cultural tourism. All this, I think, has led to where we are now, and has led to this also false notion that cinema and television are enemies, or are at a point of antagonism. I think they are not, absolutely not. I come from a generation that I spent my pocket money on Kurosawa retrospectives in Beirut in the 80s. And I stayed up to watch the Friday night feature-length film Cine Club, basically, program on Lebanese public television. I think today, one of the things that should really happen, regardless of the policymakers and the funders, is that televisions and cinemas should talk. I try my best in Paris and in France to give the films that we produce free of charge to networks of cinemas so they circulate. But I think the more we go to the cinema together, the more films are accessible from the small window of La Lucarne to the portals of YouTube, the less we are likely to become prey to sexism, racism, you know, all these ideologies that make us turn inward, that make us deliberately misunderstand the world, misunderstand difference, and we need these spaces of contact and togetherness. We also need spaces of discord and disagreement and debate. And pitting these television against the screen, against YouTube, against the film festival is just is pointless, and it's a waste of time and a waste of energy. So yes, I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm happy to make the films that I'm crazy about, passionate about, circulate as much as possible. You know, Philip Scheffner is here somewhere. We've met, yeah, he's here. We've met briefly. But I have to say that, to me, for example, that Havari, that strange, marvelous, desperate object can exist on a television screen is a gift. I talk about it all the time, not in Germany. I talk about it where people don't know you, so they discover you. But yes, it's a worthwhile fight, and I hope, and I think that, yeah, these spaces should permeate. We should be smarter about fighting the sectionalization and the, but I'm sorry, I hope I didn't bore you.
Hi. Whoa. Hello? Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you both for these presentations. I was thinking, I mean, as you were talking, and also yesterday as we talked, and we were getting, we started the day being very productively critical about the conditions under which filmmakers work and produce work for kleine Fernsehspiel. And I was just thinking, like, of course, what we didn't say is that there are always conditions under which people make work, that it doesn't matter where I don't think anybody is making work out of complete freedom with no external conditions, be they economic or time issues or family or capabilities. There's always different conditions. So what I think for us here is really interesting is to try to understand the specific conditions, the restrictions, the positive things if we drink the Kool-Aid, but also some Kool-Aid, you know, the negative things that you get when you drink the Kool-Aid, but also some of the constraints that, the specificity of the constraints under which work is made. And we had now here brought in two different, very different contexts to kind of to confront kleine Fernsehspiel with. And so I'd love to, like, maybe pursue a little bit more of that first here, and then definitely open up for discussions. But so I'm just thinking of some of the constraints would seem to unite both the tremendous amount of work produced at these Goethe Institute workshops over decades, and the apparently tremendous amount of work produced by La Lucarne. One of the things it seems that they share is the work disappears after it's made. I'd love to hear more about that. We heard from Rasha some of that, and a little bit from you, Merv, but it also, maybe another thing is that, so one thing, the work disappears with La Lucarne, something it shares with Klein Fernsehspiel is, one could say the work disappears because of its jazzy time slot. So it's another constraint. And maybe with that, just to open up, let me just turn to you, Merv, if you could maybe give us, first to take a step back and give us some context more about these workshops. So as I understand, the Goethe Institute sent Germans, although Goethe, I've been sent by Goethe Institute. So that's one thing I always liked about Goethe Institute. You don't have to be I don't have a German passport. I just live in Germany, and so they'll send me as a cultural ambassador, or they used to send me as a cultural ambassador to India to do film programs. And but so, okay, they send people living in Germany and to different places around the world, different Goethe Institutes. So maybe is that the network, one of the networks that links Rio and Lagos and Manila? And then what happens at these workshops? What do they do? And do you know more about the purpose of the workshops? And how do people get addressed to participate? And who owns the works? I think it'll go on in a second. Or maybe I'll just slide that up.
This works? Okay. I'll just put this. Okay. So the period that I'm looking at is between the 70s until the early 90s, which is an exciting time because, you had a lot of radical shifts, not just in media, art, technology, like film, video, but also like these like revolutionary shifts in the different geopolitical situations. So the context that a lot of these works were being produced in was very, a lot of them were happening, like in the case of Manila, were happening right at the start of the collapse of the Marcos dictatorship and in the early beginnings of post Marcos. And so as far as I understand is like in terms of experimental film workshops, the template was actually really in Manila. I was surprised to find that out because I would think that, say, an earlier workshop by Werner Nikes in Buenos Aires would become the template. But unfortunately, it was a one-off. So you had these one-offs in different localities, and then you had like these more or less templates that featured sometimes a lot of the same people, like Krzysztof Janecko, for example. So what was the goal of these workshops? I don't. It's also very personality based, and it's also personality based going back to the institution themselves, because this is also what I was trying to hack at, like what was the agenda of the Goethe Institute? Why were they funding so much in these particular cities or regions? Because it's a different relationship compared to, for example, Japan. Japan had a different geopolitical agenda, which you would, because Japanese national identity was very much tied to a kind of Japanese Pan-Asianism, and Southeast Asia had a special part in this. And Australia was a different relationship because, like, the Asia-Pacific corridor and like the Asia-Pacific turn of Australia that happened in the 70s. So, like, you can see the ideological and geopolitical shifts that influence cultural policy. But here, I didn't know. It was really about people and the friendships that were made. And like, I'm a Goethe Institute director. I like experimental films. I'm gonna get experimental filmmakers and make, oh, I also like video art. Let's get some video artists. So it was more like this, it seems. It wasn't that logical. And sometimes you get to say, oh, that workshop is successful. And I would try this in my different location. And actually, that's how Christoph wound up going around the world, like to conduct all these workshops. So that was the situation. But it doesn't really mean a kind of sustainability, for example. The Manila situation was good and bad because it created a kind of cycle of dependency. There was too much funding from the Goethe Institute, to the point of when the Goethe Institute dried up in funding-wise in 1992, 94, when the director left, almost no experimental film production. But it was different, for example, in the Hong Kong case, because like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of the artists were about sustainability and about institution building. Like, this is not gonna last. We're gonna make stuff happen on our own. So it also really depended on the different artists and cities where they were being like happening. And so that's why like the cases of their disappearance also are varied. In Hong Kong, the works that were produced under more or less in the late 80s with members of Vidyataj, those were more well preserved than the ones that were made early, just a few years earlier in 1983. Like the ones in 83, there's only one work that we've been able to see. And actually it also had to deal with, you need to deal again with people, because some of those people would rather not talk about their pasts. Like Jim Shum, for example, who had was part of Zuni and was part of the 1983 workshop, and 1984 with Ingo Pechke. He only really talked to Ingo Pechke. That's how we dealt with some of the screenings the last few times. But hey, would you like to come to this screening of your film that we found in Taipei, where you live? And I was like, yes to the screening, no, I won't come. End of conversation. He never replied again.
So okay. So and just to clarify, so we're talking the 80s and 90s. So these works are made on 16 millimeter, for the most part, or you mentioned also video workshops. But so the actual, I know you're trying to find the actual like material copies of these works, and I'm just wondering then. Well, are there contracts? Is there a paper trail? Did people make the work and then the Goethe Institute said, cool, we've fostered media production in Manila, we're so great, we keep the copy and take it back to Germany and bury it in an archive? Or
I wish that was the case. Because that would have meant that a lot of my work would have been like finished. Like, I wish that they just like got to work and like buried it in our archive, so I would come here to dig it up, but it's not the case. Maria Vedder's works, for example. Thanks to Tobias and one of her students, Filipino German artist Lisa May David, because she never replied to my emails.
Felipe Azar, did you say?
No. Maria Vedder. So the works from the Goethe workshops in India that she conducted are not in India. I went to Delhi. And unfortunately, I think they threw away a lot of the materials that were made pre-2000s. Different directors, different attitudes. They don't really have. They don't. And it's not in their mandate to preserve. Unfortunately, they fund archiving projects, but not to archive themselves. These works, like sometimes, are in the possession of the different artists, the German artists that facilitated them. And we were lucky that Maria Vedder kept some. So when we met her last year, So we could get the tapes. We were surprised. Like, oh, here's the works that probably came from that workshop in 1991. And I was going through them and like, these are not just India. These are also Sri Lanka, Colombo. Like, what? I don't remember going there. So that's a particular case with Maria Vedder. Sometimes, like, the works are in partnership with different institutions. Like in Rio de Janeiro, it was in partnership with the school. The school is Brazilian, so like the Philippines, it's like things disappear or things rot because it's tropical. So it's also a challenge to, like, you know, to look for the works, but you know, they actually at least have a list of the works, because not even the list exists in some of the Goethe Institute locations, because they threw away the monthly programs. They threw away the whatever publication that they had during that time period, or, you know, because the successive, like, Goethe Institute directors didn't really much care. But in terms of rights, that's also a question. It's like, we have these works now, but we don't really know how to circulate them, because the paperwork is missing. So you ultimately have to go back to the individual, to Goethe Institute headquarters themselves in Munich, and also the different artists. So, for example, I wanted to see it to digitize some works from Rio that we found while I was there. They didn't, you know. No one is actually, like, they were just sitting on it, or they didn't know that just because it's actually written down doesn't mean that it exists, right? So you actually physically have to go to verify it. But then when you find it, it's like, we can digitize this, but you need to get permission from different people. And that means like going through, trying to find, like, the contact information of people. Sometimes those people are dead, and only in the course of this research, only because, like, they're old friends, like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that old friend of mine that I collaborated with has died. So that's been happening.
Okay, thanks, Merv. Maybe I'll just ask a question to Rasha and then open up for...
Actually,
Rasha,
I mean, I want to say that it's incredible with the Goethe specifically, how the absence of an overarching policy and a commitment over time creates these like, sometimes the director of a Goethe Institute is so politically sharp that they can tell that they can play a crucial role in the city where they're based. I remember the last years of the Mubarak regime, the guy who was the head of the Goethe was so incredible. He, for example, created a program to invite, so there was an emerging community of political bloggers. So because there was such a blackout on the media, and the Mubarak dudes had not yet figured out blogs. So, and people did. And so these young voices, militants, were using blogs to communicate information, etc. And they were not necessarily aware of the emerging independent film production scene. And what does the Goethe do? Bring them together. They show the films and they ask them to write about it. And therefore, suddenly you have like an entirely different perspective and a connection with a film community that was not there before. I can also tell you that in the 80s, the Goethe Institute in Beirut was the first place where installations were commissioned. They commissioned installations to Lebanese artists. And then poof, you know, it's gone. There's no trace of that. Like, anybody wants to, you have to go to the artist, and the artist is like not well and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I know also the Goethe Institute in Buenos Aires during the dictatorship was like a site for dissident filmmakers to come together, yes, and to Narcissa Hirsch and...
Because it's a safe territory. It belongs to the German embassy. Like, they can say shit like that. They can push the police away.
So it seems, so then maybe let's say there's a structure created with these Goethe Institutes, and individuals can effect some important change. Yeah. but there isn't necessarily sustainability.
No.
And I'm thinking then also, we talked yesterday about the role of individual commissioning editors.
Yeah.
And also in France, there was an interesting comparison. Nicolas Pernetsky spoke about Safi Faye's situation with Klein Fernsehspiel and particular French film production rules where the producer was played, you needed to have a kind of French producer, and then often, let's say, Francophone filmmakers would then find themselves prey to this individual, to that person's whims, and Safi Faye suffered as a result of that. But fortunately, another individual, Eckhard Stein from Klein Fernsehspiel, really fought for Safi Faye to pressure this, to get this evil producer out of the way. So I just want to ask you, Rasha, like,
I mean, I wouldn't, maybe he was or she was an evil producer, but it's really a colonial mindset, right?
Yeah.
And for a long time, I mean, only until recently, this grant to the Global South, for films from the Global South, this grant was eliminated, like this condition was eliminated, and the condition was the extent to which French was spoken, French is spoken in a language in the film, and so you have these really bizarre, there are films from the Global South where you don't understand why everybody's speaking French at this moment, and it's really because they needed they wanted the money. They didn't. I don't know if they needed it. They wanted the money. Let's say that with La Lucarne, this horrific condition that you have to have a French producer is not, it's not applicable. Yeah, like anybody can. Of course, when you have French money, when you have a French producer, and you're dealing with ARTE in France, then more money opens up. But then it's a poison gift because it has to be spent in France. But then, if your friend is a film editor and lives in France, then it's happy news. Or your music composer or whatever. Then it's like great. And the same applies for Germany. Like film funding is when it comes to the rest of the world, is very often a poison gift, and I wish like also that like many poisons, they were also cures. I wish we could turn that around and make the film community in Germany and in France a little more cosmopolitan, or speaking more language or becoming acquainted with other cinematography, like being polyphonous in terms of film. Anyway, but I think we've been going on a road of improvement, not at least in these mechanics of film production. To answer your question about disappearing, like why the films disappear, because they're precarious economies. They're precarious. I mean, they're carried by a machine called ARTE, and then poop, dropped. Of course. I mean, we do, at least for La Lucarne, we do pre-acquisition, not co-production. So they're really small, fragile productions, unless the rights holders, the producers, filmmaker, distributor, whatever, preserves them and works at disseminating them. They fall into forgetting. And Mubi's doing great work, but what if you can't afford Mubi? And Criterion is doing great work, but so I think there should be these channels these bridges, channels, underground tunnels, overground bridges, whatever you want to call it, but many conversations about and flows of productions from theaters to cinemas to cineclubs to
Thank you, Rasha. One of the problems with projecting the program behind is it's almost like a stopwatch. But let's take another 5 minutes or so we can still have a break, or we could even take 10 minutes and then have a 10-minute break, start the final discussion a little bit late, just so we have a chance to discuss here, and then people have a chance to get some coffee or go to the bathroom. Yeah, so do you have some comments? I see one in the back. Alexandra, do you want to maintain the microphone like yesterday? Oh, thanks.
Perfect.
So there's a question back here. Yeah, here. Hello.
Now it works. Now it works.
Works for my voice.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for these very interesting presentations. What was striking to me, Rasha Salti, what you said was that La Lucarne put their program on YouTube now. And I think the day before yesterday we talked about how das kleine Fernsehspiel could be more accessible for a younger audience. And I was thinking, I mean, if ARTE could do it, why can't the ZDF? And I mean, we talked about these are American corporations, but it is also not deniable that YouTube is, or a lot of these American platforms are the platforms of communications, and that is the reality we have to deal with. And yeah, I was wondering if that could be kind of a Vorbild, I don't know what.
A role model.
a role model for das kleine Fernsehspiel.
Yeah, I mean, I would. YouTube is a portal, you know, and it looks like it's free access, but actually it's a predatory algorithm, and it's malignant. However, I think if for a short while we can use it to our means until something else comes up, because Arte also has its own platform. Arte.tv. The difference between France and Germany, I think there are more restrictions, legal restrictions, if not cultural restrictions, on what can be dumped on YouTube in Germany versus France. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
maybe, I know you addressed this yesterday, Burkhard Althoff. Would you like to say a word about it? Or I don't know if you have a thought. Sorry to put you on the spot, but since...
That's exactly as you said, like legislation is different. And then you said on the French side of Lucarne, one has to say there's a German side of Lucarne as well, also from the beginning, from 1997 on. And I think even the ways of production are different. You say you make pre-buys, and on the German side it's more, or sometimes it's co-production, and with co-production goes that the rights are shared, and then you have even more restrictions. So it's not that on the German side necessarily you don't want to put it on YouTube, but it's not possible.
Yeah, Bukhari.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I just wanted to add a comment to Merv's presentation, which I find very insightful in the larger context of a global South, and your efforts trying to track down the film heritage from Philippines and also around the area, which I find many parallel with African film heritage. In your case, it's very difficult to track down to find the copies, or if you find the copies, who are the copyrights owners. Yep. So, and for the case of African cinema, it's almost, we know who has, I would say the archives, and I will take the exact, I would say particular case of the US, where we have more and more some of the big figures of African cinema whose estates are being sold to US universities. And I can give an example of Indiana University. You have Samben, you have Vieira, Harvard, you have Med Ondo, which is, and you ask myself, how will these archives be available to African young filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers, which is very challenging, no matter how assurances they give. So you have, in the case of Africa, we know here are the archives, but they're leaving, or some have already left the continent, and very difficult to come back or even to get access. If it's not that case, you have the other case, which is simply all the roadblocks that are being put in place to get access to those works, which is, and I think last night I was talking to Klaus, the example of a documentary filmmaker who made a film, came this year about the Congo. And I was, moderating the conversation at a film festival in New York, and I asked him, your film is very archive heavy, so take me into the process. And he was telling me that he had left so many out because he went to Belgium, and they want to charge him for a 24-second sequence more than €1,000. So I'm just, adding that, comment said on one end, the Global South with different configuration, but the same issue when it comes to film heritage, how to preserve it, to have access.
I think the dream for a lot of the different artists and some of the different partner organizations is to ultimately have a lot of this material available online, because it's important that like people in the local context would be a bit more aware of this history. So a lot of the time, like, people talk about them, but where are the films? Why is it easier for me to watch a Jonas Mekas film than it is like Filipino artist, a Southeast Asian artist from the same time period? So it's those ironies that we have to deal with. But yeah, I think the way that we're going about through this research is really to tackle it like context per context, to get certain people in certain institutions excited enough that they do something about it. So this is what's been happening, and trying to map this out in the long run so it's a bit more sustainable somehow in this kind of patchwork. So this is the approach so far.
I would just say this, that people think about America and Europe as a place of archives. But I think we need to also start looking elsewhere. Cuba filmed Africa all the time. Scandinavian countries, and I think we should organize, all of us, of the Global South, to demand that we have access at a different rate, if not for free, to these images. They are our history, and some corporation under the guise of preserving them is charging us, exorbitant, unacceptably exorbitant price. I mean, in the debate on restitution, that should be something that we should fight for.
Okay, I think there are two final questions, and then we'll maybe bring up some of these discussions afterwards. I know Nicholas Pernetsky's been, working on a project about film restitution. It would be interesting to hear your voice in the concluding discussion to some of these questions. But there were, I think, Stephanie and then Barbara, right? Oh, no, you weren't. Oh, good. Okay, Stephanie. Okay, and then Philip, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there are indeed a few initiatives already. Just want to mention some. I totally agree with what Rasha just said. There are many archives, some of them organized, institutionalized, others are not, just films lying somewhere internationally, like in many different countries. But I just want to point out two initiatives. Actually, they're related also to the Goethe Institute. One was a workshop in Lisbon, where that was in 2019. And the outcome of that workshop, where I also participated in, was a paper, Call for Action and Reflection on Decolonizing Film Archives. And out of this initiative came also a website that is not yet public, but will be public very soon on the Arsenal website, or connected with the Arsenal website, a website that connects all the archival initiatives and archives and what we called in our when I say our, I mean Vincent Seliger and my book, Accidental Archivists, a network of all these people who are dealing, individuals and institutions and initiatives dealing with archives, precarious archives, forgotten archives worldwide. So there are indeed many initiatives, but as I said, it was also these initiatives I just mentioned are also related to Goethe Institute, and this is something that we at the Arsenal also, where by the way we also have some Philippine workshop films, are not just collaborating on or supporting your work in digitizing them, but of course, and this is a different case, which from many others, where we fundraise for such digitizations, and then the problem, of course, stays. The money comes from the German side, and in most transnational archive projects, that would mean that the rights then are also on the German side, even though it's not about the production of a film, it's about the restoration or digitization of a film, and we are trying to kind of change that by saying, we can in some cases bring in German funding through our work here, but the rights stay with whoever should have them in the respective countries where the films come from. But the right thing also that also relates to the YouTube question very often is not only complicated because of the institutions involved, but we often are dealing with films that are made by filmmakers who are also living in precarious situations, so we have to make sure that they also get some money. So making everything available for free should also always consider that aspect, that filmmakers should get some money for their work.
That's a good idea. And I think there was just time maybe for Philip,
I just wanted to connect maybe two things. The ones making experimental documentary films or considered difficult films for Kleines Fernsehspiel and ARTE Lucarne, for instance, like Haverie that you mentioned, and then being connected with the Goethe Institute, because there was actually a very strong, important, being a filmmaker and a producer, there was a very important link, meaning that if a film was produced and it was finished, we as filmmakers, producers, had the possibility that our film was bought by the Goethe Institute for the so-called Mediathek. And this was, on the one side, paid quite well, so you can get like 10,000 euro for it, which to have is nice. On the other hand, it meant that this film was like put to or distributed to all the different Goethe Institutes in the world, and they were allowed to screen the film in their particular Goethe Institute venues. So for us, that really meant that there is a life of our film on a huge international level. I mean, films like Haverie or the Half Moon Files, it has been screened over and over, and wherever we went, people said, like, I saw your film. It was screened at the Goethe Institute in Manila, maybe, or whatever. But this has changed, and this is like a huge step that we are now facing, is that Goethe Institute has cut down all those funds, not all of them, but the amount of films that got licensed is ridiculous. I mean, we just spoke with Munich because of the renewance for one film. It was Haverie, the license was going out. We wanted to renew it, so they give us some money, and we wanted to license a new film. And they just said they don't have any funds anymore. And so now they have, I think that person told me that for 2023 they licensed 3 films, which is ridiculous. So there is a whole way of distribution that was really fitting in what you just described also is just cut down, and that is part of a rearrangement of what is the role of the Goethe Institute playing worldwide and the relevance of culture and cultural funding. And so it's a very... Thank
you, Philip. I think we do have to come to a close. I think that what I'd like about what you brought up here at the end is we're seeing, I've heard in discussions, I think with Katrin Brinkmann in Mainz about kleine Fernsehspiel, that even though it would show at a jazzy hour like Lucarne, the goal was not to necessarily get tons of viewers. That would be fantastic, but maybe you get one review, and maybe that review draws the attention, some notice in the paper draws the attention to people in festivals, and then there's networks, and now we're seeing also that the Goethe Institute has historically also played a role in this kind of network of support, distribution, getting the work seen, that YouTube maybe is now playing in a complicated way. But I think we see how there's, I'm trying to say that this actually was, I think, a really interesting and relevant panel for a symposium on kleine Fernsehspiel, because I'm realizing now, thanks to your comment, Philip, how much more integrated some of these subjects are. And Alexandra and I were operating by instinct, and it seems to have paid off. So I'm really thrilled that you both were here. Please join me in thanking Rasha Salti and Emeritus. And why don't we take 10 minutes to have coffee break? Let's come back so that we can start up at 11:45 for a final discussion. Thank you. Okay, welcome back for our final discussion under the term the term of perspectives, and our idea here was to bring together, as we said actually in our introductory comments, to bring us together with two figures in film studies who have motivated and inspired us to continually reflect critically on the terms of the debate, on ethical, political, theoretical questions. And so we're really thrilled that Deniz Göktürk and Gertrud Koch are here with us. And Deniz has been with us through the whole symposium and has been collecting thoughts and observations. Many of you have heard some of her comments from the audience, but also noticed that she's a reference point. For instance, in Ömer Auken's presentation, Deniz is a professor of German, in the German department, correct? Yeah, okay, I should know that. It's behind me, I think, in Berkeley, but studied and did a PhD here in Berlin in the 90s, had a brief stay in England. 6 years. Okay, 6 years in Warwick, and then moved to Berkeley, and has done really path-breaking work on German-Turkish, Kurdish films, media, migration issues, questions of hybridity. We heard the phrase "pleasures of hybridity," a concept that that Deniz has developed, and also brings to her academic work experience as a professional translator, which I think is in literary context, but also in judicial and political context, as I understand. So I think she brings multifaceted perspectives to our discussion. Welcome, Deniz. And maybe I'll also welcome Gertrud in this way, who many of us here know in Berlin. And Gertrud was professor from actually the year I arrived in Berlin, 99, I believe, until 2018, or no, 2020? 20. And is the author of numerous works on philosophical aesthetics in relation to film, questions of political theory in relation to film, of Jewishness, her book with the fantastic title, Die Einstellung ist die Einstellung, so which fits very nicely to our topic here. The perspective, if you will, is the perspective. The shot is the shot, that kind of double wordplay in German with Einstellung. and important work on feminist film, thinking about questions of gender in relation to film that Gertrud did in throughout her whole career, but focused in the 80s and 90s, collected in different volumes. And we're thrilled that you have taken the time, despite your recent illness, to join us today to give us some reflection. So please join me in welcoming Gertrud Koch and Deniz Göktürk. I guess I'll start. Maybe we'll just start. We didn't want to put too much. We didn't know what would happen at this symposium, so that's why we. Hello? Here. Thank you. Yeah, there are lots of surprises throughout the symposium, and so we wanted to leave things open here just to get some impressions and collect some impressions first here on stage, and then definitely open it up for all of you who've been following along, and maybe there's some unresolved issues that we can bring together here somewhat and think about what would perspectives be for future reflection on kleine Fernsehspiel, das Kleine, and in relation to broader networks of film production, film distribution, film presentation, and questions of politics, cultural exchange. So lots of questions, and we want to try to start gathering some threads. And maybe we can start with you, Deniz, if you could. I see you have lots of notes, so I'm assuming you have some thoughts that have been simmering over the past day. If you'd like to begin with some reflections.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, first of all, thanks very much, Marc and Alexandra, for inviting me. And it was such a treat to be invited to a conference where I was not required to give a paper, where with no preparation, I was told, so this is a great treat.
It was our way to get you here.
And also, of course, thanks to the entire team here at Silent Green, who took part in organizing and staging this show. I was here in summer for the archival assembly events, and it's wonderful to be back. And thanks to all the presenters at this symposium. It's been really thought-provoking and inspiring to listen to all the presentations. And so I do have some notes on threads that emerged for me. So first of all, looking at this whole selection and cross-section of films produced by das kleine Fernsehspiel, das Kleine, as we now call it, following Elizabeth. Yeah. So it enables us to trace correspondences, and I think Stephanie has written that also in the brochure. The correspondences across, between films that are not usually seen in constellation, and that is a great. Takeaway from seeing this exhibition also, and as was everybody emphasized in their presentations, there was a very transnational horizon to these collaborations, there is no doubt that Kleine created a space enabling filmmakers from all around the world to experiment and a stage for innovation, cinematic innovation, and diversity of perspectives and formats. So that really comes into view when we look around here, and also sort of listening to the great presentations. So, of course, the role of television in producing German cinema doesn't come as a surprise, right? So, I mean, Thomas Elsässer already, in his book on New German Cinema, wrote that New German Cinema was made by TV co-productions, secondly, a system of film funding, and then thirdly, a network of international circulation through festivals and the Goethe Institutes, of course. So, and he then famously says it was a national cinema without a national audience. So, you know, in that sense, it's interesting to think about all these networks of circulation also. You know, so while we are celebrating das Kleine as this space of innovation and experimentation, which I think it definitely was, and probably more so back in the 70s than later. But you know, while we are celebrating, I think it's also important that we don't get too hagiographic and pick up on the various, tensions in the contact zone. I liked that. The various predicaments in positioning. So Elizabeth, for instance, mentioned the mismatch between the image that was delivered and the image that was expected when it came to Latin American directors producing within this framework. So that first panel, also with Nicolas, sort of really emphasized that these filmmakers were invited in, but they also were assigned specific roles and positions within the system, and I think that's a really important point that keeps coming up. I also remember in 2005. So Claudia Tronier was mentioned very favorably by everyone, in relation to the creating a space for Turkish, Kurdish, German productions, because she really took an interest and supported those filmmakers in the 90s. So I remember organizing a panel discussion with her and directors Yüksel Yavuz, Hussi Kutlucan, whose film is playing here somewhere, in Cologne at the Projekt Migration exhibition in 2005. She, at that panel already, there were a few other filmmakers also. So at that panel already, there was this, big outburst also about the roles that these actors and filmmakers were assigned in the system. Hussi Kutlucan, made a big intervention saying, why do you think I started directing? I was tired of the roles I was being given as an actor. So these, so there was a lot of also tension about these assigned and assumed identities within these systems of funding and sort of enabling that, and we heard that actually yesterday again, also from Yüksel Yavuz's film, clip was shown, and then, Britta Ohm, the co-author of the film, was saying there was also, there was tension with the commissioning editor about how the story should be told. There was also often kind of negotiation about how to that's why I'm also interested in what the role of the commissioning editors was in shaping these projects, because after all, das kleine Fernsehspiel and various other platforms or channels actually created the stages upon which these assigned and assumed identities were enacted. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. To think about. I mean, this whole conversation here enables us to think about these frameworks within which then creative work took place. And one thing that I've been missing a little, I feel, after these 2 days, is if Kleines Fernsehspiel is celebrating its 60th birthday, so wouldn't it have been a good idea to invite the filmmakers, a lot of them actually live here in Berlin, into the celebration and the conversation? And then beyond that also, extend these conversations between the gatekeepers, the commissioning editors, the creative the academics, the archivists, the curators, sort of maybe invite the filmmakers also more into the evaluation and selection processes. So that doesn't seem to be quite, there still seems to be a kind of very clear positionality in terms of the creatives and then the editors who make the decisions behind closed doors, and so that I think we could sort of go a little further maybe in that, and then also include more conversations on the aesthetics and poetics of the films. And another thread that I'm seeing is the archive thread, and there I keep thinking, if we are opening up archives, why not really have an archive on demand? We've heard, of course, that there are sort of complicated rights issues, but I think, sort of the last presentation by Rasha was actually really interesting, because she seemed to say that we should use convergence culture to our own purposes, and YouTube and the cinema space and various other platforms, and so there, I'm interested in how we could improve, basically, looking towards the future. How could we actually make it more open access? It's still very difficult to, and as we heard, especially when it comes to productions from the global south, that to actually gain access even for research purposes. So I'm not suggesting, yes, we should stick everything on YouTube for free, but, what would be models to also make this make these various platforms, streaming platforms, more navigable, you know, because that's the major challenge of our time, I find, to know what is where. It's become, you know, excessively difficult to stay on top of that with the whole kind of shift to streaming. Yeah, that's, well, you know, to last point maybe, I felt we need to be cautious not to fall back into a methodological nationalism. You know, so, I mean, we talk a lot about transnational, that's definitely, you know, become the kind of go-to term now. But at the same time, you know, there was the Fabian, right? You know, the project to label all these films by their country of origin, for instance, or sorting films and filmmakers, yes, by country. And, you know, so how do we think beyond that, and how can we complicate those categorizations, because they ultimately also rein back the whole kind of potential of transnational connections and that we are tracing here. So you know, so to avoid falling back into this methodological nationalism seems quite important, both in terms of thinking about production, but also reception, circulation, and archiving, you know, sort of metadata that we are generating and tagging onto these films. So yes, I guess my plea would be to keep the conversation going and keep it open, and yeah, keep experimenting.
May I just say one clarification? I mean, the festival did invite, or has invited filmmakers. Filmmakers are participating in the festival, not in the symposium, which Alexandra and I organized, but the larger festival, which Merle Kruger and Bettina Ellerkamp organized, also started earlier with film screenings throughout the summer. And throughout this festival, there are filmmakers. I mean, we saw a couple of them last night, and more than a couple with the filmmakers featured, Mehmet Buyukatelay and Jutta Bruckner and Angelika Levy, and the two filmmakers of not to show, but also throughout the week. So filmmakers are definitely involved. Their voices were sought out. If I could sort of speak for the organizers, just to mention that. I was just going to also just little footnote, just in relation to your example that. Oh, I was just going to add that just to recommend the film Born in Avon by Myron Zari, which is in the exhibition, which is a recent, excellent, I've drunk the Kool-Aid from the last panel to this one, a recent, excellent kleine Fernsehspiel production where it begins with her reflecting on the limited roles and the stereotyped roles that she as an Iranian German person would be allowed to play in television, and then goes on from there to give this really fascinating account of her her birth, her autobiography, and her search for a particular relationship to Iran and to other Iranian women in the diaspora. So it seems like a parallel kind of to some of the example that you're bringing up. Denise, just to add that for people who haven't seen the film. Alexandra, did you want? Oh.
No, I was wondering. Oops. Well, there was also, for me, important, maybe very blunt observation that when we actually started thinking and searching into the history of das kleine Fernsehspiel, that there is actually a lot of very interesting and productive work actually done reflecting on das kleine Fernsehspiel by commissioning editors or by the kleine Fernsehspiel itself. But at the same time, there is not much scholarly research done on das kleine Fernsehspiel. Of course, on a lot of individual films that have been produced, but the whole, let's say, complex, as we try to actually dig into it in the last 1.5 days, has not yet been addressed, especially not in German scholarship, and more from people from the outside. And I think that's also a very interesting observation. Of course, Thomas Elsässer might be an example where he did work on it, but also not from within Germany, one has to say. So that was something which we came across, and I think it's an interesting observation, and it's very inspiring now to hear that there are many projects on the ways and people engaging with it. The tension you addressed in terms of what role do the aesthetics of individual film play in this discussion or conversation, I think it was also already raised by Alexandra at the beginning. So, and indeed, we might, as a kind of a decision we really wanted to make, we put some focus on production studies, if you will, or how, in order to try to find out how to bring into questions of production into those discussions, because we do feel that there is maybe something in it in terms to better understand also the geopolitics of global film production and circulation of the last, I don't know, century, well, years. And then something I would like to add is also maybe the issue of methodologies that we came across. The question of what kind of traces are left by those both individual projects and unique projects, but then also traces that can be kind of more generalized or picture a structure of possibility or restrictions of production. And there we saw that we do need to look into many different kind of documents, and that there is a huge challenge to get access to documents, and both in terms of archives, but also in terms of questions. I think that was important, an important point that Ömer actually raised about who was the audience, or is the audiences that actually saw those films, and where are those audiences that were not present or kind of thought of. So maybe to add, and then I would also invite you, Gertrud. I mean, you were here this morning and also made, I think, some interesting observations about the conversation this morning, how, yeah, what it is at stake here.
Yeah, so I think I want to follow a path that Rasha was suggesting. And so as I'm not really someone who likes to celebrate, I like parties. But celebrations, it's not so much, I have always second thoughts about celebration. So what is for me the second thought? So what would be the antagonist of the kleine Fernsehspiel? Is it the big Fernsehspiel, or, you know? No, I think what the antagonist was underground cinema, because underground film was what we have seen, so to say. And so you see that some of the directors who were part of this underground gay movement and feminist movement and so, they became directors also for the kleine Fernsehspiel. And it was not entirely without conflicts. So you know, because, and this has to do with this difference that comes when you look at the institutionalization problem of production. So in television, in public television stations, you have a kind of reshaping of studio structures. So you have different entry levels and barriers that you have to take, so to say, with the script. So underground filmmakers wouldn't have a script. So it starts already that you get disciplined. So you have to bring some paper to get money for. So you are in the middle of making this kind of deals. And so I think I think there were two antagonists. If I would bring it now in big terms, I would say it's a little bit between capital and state, you know. And you either have a state-funded studio or a capital-funded studio. And both perspectives, so to say, are complicated and for different reasons. And so I would suggest that one should also reconstruct this story. What does it mean if a cultural production comes from a kind of cultural underground and went public, into the public? And this means you apply for public funds and you want to have a public. And so it's a change in the mindset also. And I think one has to think about it also if you go back to this, let's say, bigger history. So where does this, you know, in this outcomings of the student movements, this was called the long march through the institutions, you know. And I think something very similar happened with filmmakers and the artists, that they were doing this march through the institutions. And I think it's very peculiar for film, because film always has this kind of double side. It can be esoteric in the sense of high art, and it can be, let's say, popular in the sense of popular cinema and looking for a big public. And these two aspects in film, I think, are a kind of impossible paradox in institutions like the kleine Fernsehspiel. And it's interesting because paradoxes make you think, because you have to solve it at one point. And I think it was, in so far, a very fruitful experiment. What does it mean to enter an institution? For the German situation, one has also to take in mind that everything was publicly funded. Each town had its own opera. It was all funded. So, I mean, from artists' point of view, the filmmakers felt terribly misrecognized that they had to fight for public funding. What in other arts, performative arts, you wouldn't have. So I remember as a critic at the time, we always did this kind of, you know, calculations that that's unfair, there should be more funding for film. And you know what happened, just to remind you about the history of the split, that the biggest funding was not given by the Culture Ministry for Culture, but by the Finance Ministry. So it was seen as a purely economic funding. It was funding for the industry. So you had this tendency. So if we speak about what is really this niche where the kleine Fernsehspiel was established, was indeed between these different layers also of public funding, because industry was also publicly funded. So from these tensions, I think, raise a lot of this second thoughts we have. What is aesthetic? So what is the criteria to distinguish between the industry and the art, you know, the video art, the installation arts that 10 years later became apparently attractive for filmmakers like Farocchi, Alexander Kluge and so, who all went then into the galleries. So all these venues, I think, are at stake when we speak about this production of kleine Fernsehspiel, that has as a publicly funded production in a public television station. Like ARTE today, I think it's very much a similar structure. And I look a lot of ARTE films because they are great. So it's a, you know, but you see there, it is this kind of compromise in it. And you still could see the split. And I think one shouldn't wipe it out because one has to celebrate something. I think it's a split in film, to some regard, because it has this double concept of what public is. It has this idea of what is it as a kind of collective art, so to say, a cultural product. So it should have state funding, as other cultural sectors too, like schools, the sciences, and so on and so on. And on the other side, we want the radicality of a public sphere that is independent from the institutions. Because I think, and this is, I think, this paradox Rasha may have had in mind, that it's not the same. To be produced by a public institution doesn't mean that you are in the public sphere. To be in the public sphere means that you are making films or texts or whatsoever that are sometimes attacking the same institutions from which you want the funding. And this is this kind of constant conflict also, that you have an idea of a public sphere where you should have this kind of free debate, so to say. You know, it's like free speech, free art, free expression. So everybody has a right, so to say, to express oneself, to have a voice. Some do it through film and so on and so on. So this is, I think, also the liberal model, if you want, but I take it more seriously also as a political model of, you know, what is in aesthetics this moment of freedom, or, you know, taking the liberty to express what you think is important without getting pre-censored or validated or so, what the institution will do. So if you put the funding in an institution, it doesn't mean that these mechanisms are stopped. And I think that's still a problem. What we can look with this crisis in the Goethe Institutes, the moment, you know, the public funding, the state funding for the Goethe Institutes drops, you will have no longer this kind of safe space of production. So it's dependent on politics, and politics, it's something that is also happening outside of the institutions. So therefore I would still, let's say, encourage filmmakers who today want to produce films to go to this institution. Yes, there is a kind of niche. One should try to get a foot into it, but to be aware that it's not a perfect realm of freedom in heaven. So I think one has to see it's always in the nature of film that it's very, I mean, costful. You need a lot of money to make it. You need other people to cooperate with you. So it's a kind of, in itself, also a kind of social endeavor. And so this would go back to this question, how should we organize film culture, filmmaking, film viewing under these conditions where the public, the institutionalized public, gets into trouble because of this kind of capitalized outside public, like YouTube, the internet, and so on. This is one of the big antagonists, I would say, because Netflix would produce, and, you know, you have this kind of mix there, exactly. A capitalist funded production that is on the internet, and it competes with underground films. And so I think all these strata in film production are still there. And one has very careful to think about it, where one is situating one's own work. And it comes with a price, as we know. Either you lose the public in terms of funding, or you lose public in terms of viewing units, you know. But you cannot have it all. And so maybe one has to ask here more for a kind of multi-perspectival approach. So I'm a big admirer of some of African cinemas that are doing a kind of mimicry to industrial cinema by copying it in terms of kind of satirical performances. What is a great way to deal with this problem. And I think these are more this kind of underground structures that come with small budgets, with a lot of emphasis on improvisation, but that are also very successful at one point. So maybe one should think, what is the status of filmmaking these days under these conditions of high-tech production system and this, let's say, underground level? You just grab your video camera and you start making a film. And that was the strategy the Goethe Institutes, by the way, Farocki with this big project on labor, were emphasizing. You just do it, you know. Don't wait until you have the first million. Start to do it, you know. Grab your camera, go to the backyard and look what's going on there. So, you know, I think that's this kind of more pirate technologies that comes with the industry, with the cheap consumer goods, is still a possibility. So that was my celebration for cinema.
Deniz. Maybe, I mean, you really put your finger on the kind of, you know, the predicament, right? That these, you know, funding, on the one hand, you know, enables, on the other hand, it can be poisonous because it's you know, things get appropriated within the institution, but you know, on the other hand, we can't do without the institutions. Or you know, in many countries, actually, I appreciated Barbara Worm's intervention yesterday, where she pointed out that you know, in the Eastern European countries, in Russia, you know, sort of the official state television was by no means, public television was by no means a utopian space of free expression, right? If anything, the private channels offered something in that vein for brief periods, but so the state television was not it. And you know, sort of elsewhere we have nothing but the market, right? So so these are also important niches, and you know, sort of we can probably, yeah, I would be totally with you, sort of encouraging filmmakers to still use them, but maybe also, you know, sort of undercut them with new means.
Like to switch for a moment the role I have taken and defend public television, because I think public television is not the same as state television, because public television is an institution, but it's not, let's say, the state itself. It doesn't represent the state. It's a very complicated legal construction that is based on a principle of representation. That's part of the conservative model, if you want. But the representation is allowing for a lot of different social groups to be part in these gremiums and consortiums and so. So it's not that you have a kind of authoritarian state-owned centralized thing. You know, there are even a kind of federal principle. So each federal state has its own channel. So it's a distributed power. So it's not so centralized. So therefore, I would say it's not state television. It's a shortcut, if speaking like this. Public means a kind of representation of the body of the people, so to say.
Yeah, just as
Fall too much into anarchism here.
just as Gertrud, as you were talking, I think we'll open up for questions in just a second. I just wanted to just make a link to this fantastic quote that Elizabeth in her talk yesterday showed of Raul Ruiz describing his tensions with ZDF when they, like at that time, insisted that the funding for third world films, the filmmakers had to be in their third world, and he was not able to stay in Chile because of the dictatorship, and so he had to at least be in Latin America. So he went to Honduras and made a Chilean film, if you will, there. But and he taught, and then it wasn't recognized as political by the editors, but he wrote, I'm hopefully not completely misrepresenting what you discuss this with, but he had this fantastic quote in a letter that he wrote, but maybe didn't send, where he talked about the difference between know-how and which would be the know-how. He's know-how, know where, and know why. And he said, we know where and know why. We may not have the know-how to make our films, but if we had the know-how, we wouldn't make these films, because you can't make films for the little bit of money you're giving us. So that was really a nice distinction to think of, this know where and know why, and that's what the filmmakers have, and to rethink this kind of, also thinking of it today, how know-how and skills, and in this neoliberal logic of know-how, that we see already a resistance to that in what Raul Ruiz was articulating, I think, so clearly there.
I mean, yeah, on the same panel, there was also another great quote that Nicholas brought up, discussing the criteria of selection, and support and funding. And one important criterion seems to be, will German audiences be able to relate? So yes, I understand it's not state television, but there is a sort of also Bildungsauftrag, sort of understanding. We are representing German society here, right? And the quote was, viel exotischer Reiz, aber nicht unser Bier. Ein Allerweltladen sollten wir nicht werden. So I forget now who said it, but it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But that seemed also seemed to sum up the attitude in some ways, right? And sort of, in the past I've written about paternalism in these contexts, and you used the word patronizing yesterday, Marc. So there was a certain also patronizing attitude towards these foreign filmmakers, right? They were allowed to play a little, but within defined parameters.
And maybe is it okay if we open up for some questions or comments? Yeah, I think maybe I could give a microphone.
No, we have one there.
Oh, we do. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Fabian. Yeah. So if there are any, there are some.
Something I heard several times over the last few days was like that this symposium, as well as the DKF itself, wanted to refrain from like a hagiographic retrospective view. But something that stood out to me was that, at least in my, as far as I could tell, there seems to be this, and I'm hyperbolizing a little here intentionally, sort of this like almost saint-like veneration for this figure of Eckhard Stein. And I just wanted to float the question of whether maybe this stance should be scrutinized a little more.
Sure. Scrutinize away, man. Yeah, I mean, I think we also heard a quote, I can't remember a quote yesterday that someone gave of Eckhart Stein that certainly didn't seem so flattering. I think it was delivered very dryly, but I think Nikolaus, maybe you mentioned that. Yeah, no, but I think it's an important thing. I mean, Eckhart Stein is this figure who kind of dominates in the history of kleine Fernsehspiel. And yeah, I'd just say, yeah. Nikolaus, would you like to?
Just very quickly, I think the first place to look are Eckhart Stein's self-descriptions, which are published, and Aktenkundig, you don't even have to go to the archive, because he's quite self-critical. I mean, his self-criticism is also bounded in certain ways, and maybe strategic as well. But there's a lot there. So, yeah.
I just want to, from the perspective of one of the creators of the whole thing here, say that our intention was not to celebrate. Celebrations have been done this year enough. What we tried to create a public sphere by making this archive, taking this archive as one of many archives, and make it accessible, because usually they're not, as we discussed before. And of course, like quoting Eckhart Stein, putting all this into communication is part of this trying, because as Alexandra said, it hasn't been done, or Marc, I don't know, it hasn't been done yet. And I think, and I don't speak for das kleine Fernsehspiel, because we invited also them to be here and to be accessible for the filmmakers and for the scholars, to create a place of communication as we do here right now. That was the intention, not the celebration. Sorry.
I mean, it was definitely not my intention to criticize das kleine Fernsehspiel and the really terrific work this institution has done. I just wanted to point to some more structural problems that are based in filmmaking, and I think one has to reflect this when one is speaking about the products also. I mean, you know, when Deniz asks, so is there a kind of shared aesthetics in this institutionalized production, in the studio, so to say? One can say yes and no. A little bit what Rasha said for ARTE, you know. There is a problem that you have, let's say, to find more compromises, because you have to serve a bigger public. And on the other side, you know, you can probe the limits of this. And by probing the limits, you can, I mean, enlarge perspectives and visions. And I think the kleine Fernsehspiel has done this tremendously. So it's not that I'm not ready to acknowledge the merits. It was a joke about celebration, because I missed the party.
I mean, just about the celebration, I mean, I also didn't want to disparage, you know, sort of this, the show at all. And I think it's a wonderful effort to stage the archive. You know, the only thing that I noticed was that several filmmakers who made 3 films with this kleine Fernsehspiel weren't even aware of this event here, and they had not been invited to come and engage and listen and celebrate. So I mean, I was actually the one who invited Yüksel Yavuz. He did not know about this whole happening. So that was, you know, sort of behind my remark.
Maybe maybe also picking up again the figure of Stein. I think it's, on one hand, we have also seen, and that's also important over the last days, some more faces and voices that we should associate with commissioning editors. But it's also very interesting that there is this, and I think it also has to do with how we tell stories or histories, that then there is this kind of paternal figure at the horizon that pops up again and again. And of course, we have to kind of try to, to tell the story differently and to also look for the other figures. But I was very happy to see also yesterday evening some other persons speaking from the Redaktion about their work. But yeah, Stephanie has a question.
Rachel has the...
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I have the mic. Well, I don't know. It's more of a comment, really. It's more of a comment, really. I don't know why there's two voices here, but just coming from the UK, you know, I think that what was being done in Germany was kind of actually quite amazing, and I think that the BFI, for example, really went over quite to wanting to fund commercial films that would, be a huge public, huge success. And so it was very difficult to get the kind of funding that Kleine gave. And I mean, certainly Dwoskin is one of the figures that his later films that were funded in Germany, he just couldn't get any funding in the UK at all. So you either have, on the one hand, the Filmmakers Co-op or the Lux, where you could do it yourself at that point, or you had the BFI. There was, or the Arts Council, I suppose, but there was very, very little that would fund independent film in the UK. So, I just think in a way it is an amazing model, and in fact it was a model because it was, I think that not just Dwoskin but many others were advocating for Channel 4 to be the kind of example in the UK, and I'm pretty sure that came from Kleine and the example here. So just to give a kind of slightly different perspective, coming from another country in Europe, thank God we are still geographically in Europe. So I couldn't help that. So that was all I wanted to say. Thanks.
No, I just wanted to remind that we, in terms of celebrations, and I think we all agree that this is a celebration for, it's not a curatorial concept or anything like that in general, or should not be, and we even have the tendency to forget that dates very often at the Arsenal that we could celebrate. But 1963 was obviously a time, or the time around 1963, a time where also many other institutions started, not just us, the Arsenal as well, but also, and I pointed that out yesterday already, the DRD Künstlerprogramm, and all of them had a very transnational approach at that time. And so I think this is something that we all had in mind, also that to look at just this historical time, and which in a way I think was not the underground, because it was like a step into institutionalization for all of us, but as Gertrud pointed out, was very much related to the underground and had a kind of underground attitude in many ways. And that's why it was called the kleine Fernsehspiel, for example. And it was not the Deutsche Kinemathek, but the Freunde der Deutschen Kinemathek and the DRD Künstlerprogramm as well. And I think I remember over the year that there were others who I heard were also founded in '63. I just can't think of them at the moment. So it's not a celebration, but I think it's a look at history from of course the perspective of the present that interests us at this point. Networks I think are really important.
I just want to piggyback on what Rachel was saying about the role of Channel 4 in the UK, and there was a key figure then there, you know, Alan Fountain, and he did actually had developed strong dialogues with Eckhart Stein and also with Thierry Garrel, who was mentioned by Rasha Salti. So I think that that's also something that we could have perhaps explored more, because there were not only transnational dialogues, you know, outside Europe with global South filmmakers, but also there were very productive dialogues going on in a pan-European level. And one of the things that I remember that Alan Fountain really regretted was that because everything was quite informal, right? He regretted that their dialogues were never institutionalized. Right? It was like on a friendship kind of level. Yeah, so that's also interesting to explore, no? Things were very much happening in an affective level, yeah, rather than institutional, officialized way, yeah. It was short, but it was very productive, right? It was from this is why we're looking at this time, right? Like the 1980s until early 1990s, yeah.
Maybe can I just add something there, thinking about our discussion with Merv this morning, because I was maybe pushing on this issue and criticizing this idea that we have these structures, the Goethe Institute, kleine Fernsehspiel, or Channel 4, but we don't seem to have the institutionalization of the ephemeral presence of individual figures, you know, that they are there. Amazing Goethe Institute director in Cairo or in Manila, and we'll get all this stuff going, but then they leave and all that work is gone. But on the other hand, sometimes that's the only, like if you institutionalize those things, then they won't be able to be done. That sometimes you need to work underground and need to let things be in the hands of individuals, or we need to support, these individuals and not call for, maybe, in an ideal world, it would be great if these structures were institutionalized, but thinking even today in Germany, where things are becoming very difficult in cultural contexts, where things become unspeakable, where people become uninvited because of their political beliefs or some petition they signed 15 years ago that they didn't read carefully, perhaps, or they did, and whatever. But working souterrain is, I think, more necessary today, perhaps than ever. But in these contexts, I think we should recognize the significance of that kind of political work without doing what I did in the last panel of really criticizing it for not being institutionalized. There's just a thought there.
I think I have more of a comment than a question. This whole symposium was under the title Situated History, and I feel like we had a lot of very different approaches to this history, but I feel like to really do something with that, we or could have been productive to also look at the present and what that means now for the future with a view on this history. And I feel like that was, I mean, sometimes it was a little bit sprinkled in, but I feel like it maybe could have had a little bit more of a view on it. And yeah, I don't know, maybe what are you thinking about that?
It was called Situated Histories, but still, your point is important about the present and this history we're experiencing right now.
I was thinking about that, you know, the situatedness, and, you know, we brought it up after the first panel also, that, you know, sort of there is always some situating taking place. Also, in that whole interplay between the institution, the commissioning editors, the filmmakers, so that, and my sort of recommendation for the future would be also, to stay very aware of those kind of labelings and categorizations, and sort of sorting filmmakers by country of origin, and that's what I meant by beware of methodological nationalism creeping in. So, but at the same time, of course, sort of also stay attentive to those kinds of networks and positionalities that that occur within and outside the institutions, and also at this point also stay aware of all the kind of the myriad of venues and platforms of circulation, and how to navigate those, so that becomes a major challenge, I think, so, and that really complicates the whole notion of the public sphere, as we've heard from Gertrud, so what is, what do we still consider public sphere? Is YouTube our public sphere now? So I think sort of looking back at the archive, there are lots of questions to raise concerning the future of our media culture and convergence culture that we live in, right?
Maybe I can also add something. I think that's a very important observation, and at the same time, at least for me, I felt that there were so many moments. We talked about this room for experimentation or experiment, and of course we also know that that is something that is very difficult or cannot be controlled and produced. And I think that's something, for example, that I would take away, that this constant reflection of how not to institutionalize in a way that it's formatting and generalizing, or as we also kind of mentioned in the introduction, that things become scalable. And lose their uniqueness, for example, or maybe hints to think about possible futures. And by looking into the histories in plural, also kind of reflect on the rooms or ideas of where things were made possible in a certain context, but which do not translate directly to the contemporary or future. So I think there might be some ways and hints where you can think about possible futures. Yes, I'll leave it there. And
I just thought of one more thing actually in that context, because we've heard from several filmmakers also that, sort of going beyond that, those 3 films that Kleines Fernsehspiel funds is very difficult, sort of having, making those 3 films, and then there is a threshold, and so there were also questions about sort of the composition of those editorial boards, right? So I think Marc said they should. Also, what was it? Move on, or
jump off a cliff?
Not jump the cliff, but step away. Right? So in a way, I mean, what kind of models could we think about? That would also sort of invite filmmakers to the table. Maybe those people who have made those 3 films could also then be included in consultation and editorial board meetings from time to time, and sort of to also bring the diversity of perspectives to those decision tables.
I mean, I'm always very astonished when I'm seeing a film and at the end it comes this endless list of co-producers. And so, I mean, I would be interested in more, I mean, also doing research, are there patterns? Are those the networks we are speaking about? Because I think it's very rare that a film get funding just from one institution. Right. Mostly it's a collection and a cooperation, European fundings all over the places. So I think it's more and more international co-productions that go from cultural institutions to lobbyists. You know, sometimes I'm really astonished. I mean, who will give money for films? And that's, you have this long list, and I can see how painful it is to deal with all of them. When you just want to do your film, you know, and first you have to do all this, you know, it's a kind of multiplication of problems also. But I would be interested, I don't know if there's research done on this, are there patterns? Who will get funding from which group of funding institutions and so on? So is it a European circle or is it a kind of international co-production circle? And who are the matchings? Who are the matches there? So what patterns do we have here?
How does your image fit into all this, for instance? Well, I think there is a lot to be done. I think there is not too much research, actually, because it's also not too easy, actually, to access those, well, you can read all the kind of the end credits and try to do something with it. But I think that the festival studies research people have done an amazing job in trying to start to raise questions about films, not only in terms of how they circulate globally or within certain festival networks, but also how the co-producing films within the framework of festivals has kind of changed or, well, also affected aesthetics and issues. So I think there is some pertinent research done, but needs to be expanded, maybe also in the field of producing.
I think we also, unfortunately, we can't expand any further here. I think we have to come to a close. And we did not expect to come to a nice round close where all the threads get brought together. The idea was to open more up and for us to continue thinking about this, and for the people who are able to attend different events in the festival during the week, hopefully there's some issues that were raised here that could further make productive the exchanges that you have. I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that I find very interesting. I've never taken part in a symposium or organize a symposium that in and of itself is part of an exhibition, that is like ausgestellt, that is like an exhibition object. And I think that's really something I haven't really reflected on yet, what that, yeah, that we're all part, we're an art object here for visitors to the exhibition to observe and reflect upon in relation to the history of kleine Fernsehspiel. But I'm really happy that you both were here to offer your thoughts. And yeah, please join Alexandra and I in thanking Deniz Göktürk and Gertrud Koch.
And then I think we also would like to thank again the organizers on stage and behind for all their efforts to helping us putting together this symposium, but also you as an audience for the vivid conversations and discussions, and I hope they will go on. And last but not least, I would also like to point out that during the next week, you will have ample opportunity to both meet filmmakers, conversations, see films, but also meet das kleine in presence here. They will be working in the ateliers. So the show goes on. And next weekend, there will be also some programs, and especially also the issue of archiving and access will be on the table again. So thanks you all. I don't know, Merle, you would like to say something? No?
Very fine, thank you, Alexandra.
Okay. Okay. Yes, so thank you all and have a nice rest of a Sunday. Thank you.